The new year seems to demand a new project. In the first project that I demonstrated, countries and cities, I mentioned that real-world applications tended to maintain or need to maintain a one-to-many relationship and gave as an example a purchase order. Each purchase order record needs to have a header that stores information about the order number, date, supplier, etc. And the detail record stores information about the various order lines, such as product description, unit price, and quantity. In this project, I'm going to use the techniques I used in countries and cities to create a basic purchase order system. However, I intend to throw a few obstacles in my path to make it more of a challenge. I hope to be able to email a PDF of each order to the supplier. I also intend to implement basic authentication in the first place to record who has requested the purchase order and to be able to email them a confirmation, but possibly also to implement role-based security around access to parts of the system. One other complication I might tackle is to post the whole order, header and multiple order lines as a single transaction to the SQL database. No doubt other problems will present themselves as I progress. The approach I'm going to use in this project is going to be different from the original one. In that project, I didn't start documenting and recording YouTube videos before I had pretty much finished the project and knew what I was doing, at least as far as that project was concerned. This time I'm going to start documenting what I'm going to do as I do it. I therefore fully anticipate that things will go wrong, either disastrously and I will have to abandon the project or some part of it, or less disastrously, which could mean I'll have to backtrack and correct a previous error or go down a different route. Rather than be constantly referring back to the documentation in countries and cities, I plan to make the documentation for this project completely self-contained. This, of course, means that if you read the documentation for countries and cities or watch the videos, there will be duplication. But I'm told repetition is a good way to learn anyway. Right, so let's have a look at the purchase order. This is a mock-up of the purchase order that I've done using Excel. In the first instance, to give me an idea of where the data is coming from. So the fields in yellow, such as the supplier, who it's requested by, the product, and the tax rates will come from lookup tables. The address will also come from lookup table, but will be able to be overwritten by the user. So for example, Aardvark stationery supplies will have maybe this address on their record, but we could change the address for the order. Similarly for the email address. The items in peach color will be automatically generated by the system. So the order number will be generated by the system. The net total, for example, will be quantity times unit price, and the tax will also be calculated, and therefore the total and grand total. The items in green will be data entered by the user. So that's the general idea. If we start to think about that and look at the data, we'll see that we'll need to have the 3 lookup tables for supplier, product, and tax. The supplier will have an ID. This will be automatically generated by the system, a name, address, postcode, email. And for each record, I'm going to have a field that's a bit field, a yes or no, true or false, that says the supplier is archived. This way, we won't actually delete a supplier, but we'll mark it as having been deleted effectively. Similarly for products, we'll have a product ID automatically generated by the system, a product code. Lots of companies have product codes that they use to describe their products, a description, a unit price, who supplied the product, and whether it's also archived. We'll also have tax, ID, description, tax rate, and is archived. Now, I live in the UK and we have tax called value added tax, but I'm just changing this in the project just to tax um, to present a more generalized version of what the system is going to need. And the purchase order tables, that's going to consist of an ID, an automatic, which will be automatically generated a next auto number, an order number, which will be generated by the system but will be programmed by us to be the next number in a sequence, the order date, which will default to the system date, the supplier ID, su supplier address, postcode, and email. Now, you might be wondering why we'd want to record these on the header. Um, if we were going to go for a fully normalized database, you might say, well, we don't need that. We've got that information actually on the supplier record. But in practice, of course, suppliers can change addresses. And what we want to record here for archive or for audit purposes is the address that the actual order was sent to. So if the supplier changes his address in the future, we will actually record on the purchase order the address that the order was actually sent to. Now we also have a record here of whether the header is archived. And then on the individual lines, we've got a line ID, which will be generated automatically. The header ID, which will refer to the header ID. The product ID, which will use the lookup for the product. Product description, again from the product table, but we can change it if we need to. Product quantity, unit price, and tax rate. Now you'll notice here that we haven't got a PO line is archived. I don't think there's any need for that. Once an order has been placed, we won't be able to change it. And in the process of entering a purchase order, if we delete a line, that's fine. It's not going to be going to the supplier anyway, so we can leave it at that stage. Right, I think the next thing we need to do is to look at the database, but the creation of the database, but I'll leave that for the next video. I'll put a link in the description to a database where I'm documenting the steps that I'm taking in this project. If you've got any suggestions or questions about what I'm doing, please let me know in the comments below. I look forward to seeing what you think.